sensory, ascending, spinal tracts. Dr. Jamila El-Madani. Objectives: by the end of the lecture, the student will be able to define the meaning of a tract, distinguish between the different types of tracts, locate the position of each tract, describe the sensory pathway, identify the different sensory spinal tracts and their functions, identify the course of each of these tracts. The white matter of the spinal cord consists of ascending and descending nerve fibers. It is divided into dorsal, lateral and ventral columns or funiculi, white matter tracts. Bundles or fasciculi of fibers that occupy more or less definite positions in the white matter. They have the same origin, termination and carry the same function. White matter tracts. They are classified into 1. Short tracts, intersegmental or propriospinal. Fibers occupy narrow band peripheral to the gray matter, fasciculus proprius. They interconnect adjacent or distant spinal segments and permit intersegmental coordination. 2. Long tracts, are ascending, sensory or afferent. 2 long tracts, are ascending, sensory or afferent. B. Descending, motor or efferent. They serve to join the brain to the spinal cord. Ascending tracts carry impulses from pain, thermal, tactile, muscle and joint receptors to the brain. Some of this information eventually reaches a conscious level, the cerebral cortex, while some is destined for subconscious centers, for example the cerebellum. Pathways that carry information to a conscious level share certain common characteristics. There is a sequence of 3 neurons between the peripheral receptors and the cerebral cortex. The first-order neuron or primary afferent neuron enters the spinal cord through the dorsal root of a spinal nerve and its cell body lies in the dorsal root ganglion. The main fiber remains on the ipsilateral side of the cord and terminates in synaptic contact with the second neuron, which lies either in the spinal gray matter or in the medulla oblongata of the brainstem. The axon of the second-order neuron crosses over, decussates, to the opposite side of the SNES and ascends to the thalamus, where it terminates. The third-order neuron has its cell body in the thalamus. Its axon passes to the somatosensory cortex of the parietal lobe of the cerebral hemisphere. Spinocerebellar pathway. 3 major pathways carry sensory information. Posterior column, gracile and cuneate fasciculi. Anterolateral pathway, spinothalamic. Spinocerebellar pathway. Dorsal column, posterior column. Contains 2 tracts, fasciculus gracilis, field goal, and fasciculus cuneatus, FC. Carry impulses concerned with proprioception and discriminative touch from ipsilateral side of the body. Contain the axons of primary afferent neurons that have entered cord through dorsal roots of spinal nerves. Field goal contains fibers received at sacral, lumbar and lower thoracic levels. FC contains fibers received at upper thoracic and cervical levels. Fibers ascend without interruption where they terminate upon second-order neurons in nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. The axons of the second-order neurons decussate in the medulla as internal arcuate fibers and ascend through the brainstem as medial lemniscus. The medial lemniscus terminates in the ventral posterior nucleus of the thalamus. Third-order neurons, which project to the somatosensory cortex, thalamocortical fibers. Spinothalamic tracts located lateral and ventral to the ventral horn. Carry impulses concerned with pain and thermal sensations. Lateral tract, and non-discriminative touch and pressure, anterior tract. In brainstem, constitute the spinal lemniscus. Information is sent to the primary sensory cortex on the opposite side of the body. Spinothalamic tracts, lateral spinothalamic tract. Function. Carries pain and temperature to thalamus and sensory area of the cerebral cortex. Neurons, 3 neurons. Neuron I, small cells in the dorsal root ganglia. Neuron 2, cells of substantia gelatinosa of Rolandi in the posterior horn. Neuron 3, cells of VP, nucleus of the thalamus. The spinothalamic tract contains second-order neurons, the cell bodies of which lie in the contralateral dorsal horn, anterior spinothalamic tract. Function: carries crude touch and pressure to thalamus and sensory cortex. Neurons: 3 neurons. Neuron I: medium-sized cells in the dorsal root ganglia. Neuron II: cells of main sensory nucleus or nucleus proprius. Neuron III: cells of VP nucleus of thalamus. Effect of lesion: loss of crude touch sensation below the level of the lesion. Syringomyelia: widening of the central canal, leads to loss of pain and temperature below the level of the lesion because the spinothalamic axons decussate to the opposite side of the cord by passing through the ventral white commissure, which lies ventral to the central canal of the cord. Spinocerebellar tracts. The spinocerebellar system consists of a sequence of only 2 neurons. Neuron I: large cells of dorsal root ganglia. Neuron II: cells of the nucleus dorsalis, Clark's nucleus. 2 tracts, dorsal and ventral. Located near the dorsolateral and ventrolateral surfaces of the cord. Contain axons of the second-order neurons. Carry information derived from muscle spindles, Golgi tendon organs and tactile receptors to the cerebellum. For the control of posture and coordination of movements. Posterior Spinocerebellar Tract. Present only above level L3. The cell bodies of second-order neuron lie in Clark's column. Axons of second-order neuron terminate ipsilaterally, uncrossed, in the cerebellar cortex by entering through the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Posterior Spinocerebellar Tract convey sensory information to the same side of the cerebellum. Ventral, Anterior Spinocerebellar Tract. The cell bodies of second-order neuron lie in base of the dorsal horn of the lumbosacral segments. Axons of second-order neuron cross to opposite side, ascend as far as the midbrain, and then make a sharp turn caudally and enter the superior cerebellar peduncle. The fibers cross the midline for a second time within the cerebellum before terminating in the cerebellar cortex. Ventral Spinocerebellar Tract convey sensory information to the same side of the cerebellum. Spinotectal Tract ascends in the anterolateral part, in close association with Spinothalamic system. Primary afferents reach dorsal horn through dorsal roots and terminate on second-order neurons. The cell bodies of second-order neuron lie in base of the dorsal horn. Axons of second-order neuron cross to opposite side, and project to the periaqueductal gray matter and superior colliculus in the midbrain. Involved in reflexive turning of the head and eyes toward a point of cutaneous stimulation, Spino-olivary tract. Indirect spinocerebellar pathway, Spino-olivocerebellar. Impulses from the spinal cord are relayed to the cerebellum via inferior olivarine nucleus. Convey sensory information to the cerebellum. Fibers arise at all levels of the spinal cord. Contribute to movement coordination associated primarily with balance. Spinoreticular tract. Originates in lamina fourate. Contains uncrossed fibers that end in medullary reticular formation and crossed and uncrossed fibers that terminate in pontine reticular formation. Forms part of the ascending reticular activating system. Involved in arousing consciousness in the reticular activating system through cutaneous stimulation.